Hey, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. Happy to have a guest on today. Jen Garrett is with me. Jen is a great author. She has a connection. We have a shared connection. Dominic Damaski as her publisher. Hi, Dom. And Jen comes on today to talk about her two books. She has and her podcast. She's a podcaster. So hello. I have a great new podcast to share with you as well, Jen's. So her podcast is called Move the Ball. She has her two books, and all this stuff is in the show notes, but it's all around football and building a bridge between football and life and business and what you can take from the game and apply it to you today. If you're a football fan, you have to check out Jen's amazing lineup of guests that she's had in the past. My gosh, some of the best names in football have been on her podcast. Go there in the link in the show notes. So share this with every football fan that you know. Jen's podcast is superb. Jen is active military, serving her country. She's a single mom. She does everything. And she is a super amazing guest to have on the podcast. I'm inspired talking to her. And we go through a few things. I love these a couple quotes that you'll hear later on. She talks about be where your feet are, football reference. I love that. She also, one thing she ends off her podcast with this, she says, suit up, show up, and move the ball. And that's life right there. That's what I'm talking about. That is something that you can put into place right now. Suit up, show up, and move the ball. Here on Living the Next Chapter, Jen Garrett, author, podcaster, and all-around superhuman. I'm so happy to have Jen on the podcast. Here we go.
Right? There's a chapter in the book called Manage the Game Clock. There's 1,440 minutes we have each day. So how are you spending those minutes when you've checked in to social media in the world? Now you're consuming some of those minutes on that stuff that may or may not be productive. Usually it's not. So that's the first thing. Instead of checking into the internet and the world first thing, the other habit that I would say implement is I have what I call my morning power hour. So the first hour of the day, I'm taking time to review my plan, look at what meetings I have on the calendar, making sure those are still valid for the day, or should I push something out because it's not a priority for the day. I make sure that I have scheduled block times for the tasks that are important. I've scheduled those usually at the beginning of the week because that way I'm trying to be very organized with how I spend my time. So I'm just making sure those are still valid. I'm also spending some time just thinking strategically on my business. Like, am I focused on the right things that are going to help me? Do I need to add some things or reshift some things? But I'm taking that time for me and my business. And then I'm also stretching. Hydrating is very important too, but I'm warming the body up and getting ready to have an impactful day. So I would say no matter what your goals are, those two things are things that are applicable. One thing you should not do and one thing that you should do.
Okay, everyone, welcome to the podcast. I have a really amazing guest with a mutual friend, which I'm happy to talk about, Dominic Damaski, and he's kind of our mutual friend. But my guest today is Jen. Jen Garrett's on with me today. We're going to be talking about podcasting. We're going to be talking about football. We're going to be talking about business. We're going to be talking about coaching. We're going to talk about so many great things. I've been going through your website, Jen. It is outstanding. So happy to have you on the podcast. Welcome to Living the Next Chapter.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for us to chat today.
I love having a fellow podcaster on, because it answers all the questions. We don't have to we can just skip the line and get ahead right to the recording because you know what you're doing. So this is really fun for me too.
Awesome. Well, let's go.
Okay. So where are you in the world, first of all?
I'm based in Chicago, Illinois. And so the weather is still nice this week, which is good, but we know what's coming soon. That little white powdery stuff will be here soon.
The Windy City representing. I love it. The home of Oprah, right? Is that right?
Yes.
There you go.
Yep.
Right. And I think there was a TV show way back in the day, called Perfect Strangers.
Yes.
Two guys, cousins, right? That's how I remember the beginning of the show, and they would go down the river there. And anyways, I'm kind of digressing.
I love that show, by the way.
That was a really good show. Belky Bartokomits or whatever his name was. I love it. So anyway, Jen, welcome to the podcast. One thing that really stood out to me when we talked in our pre-interview a little while back was your active military service, and that really spoke to me. I have a lot of friends and family that have served or serve in other ways, but I just wanted to acknowledge that off the bat and say thank you for serving. And you gave me a little statistic about the amount of U.S. citizens that sign up and serve their country, and it was very, very low for active service. What was that percentage that you shared?
Yeah, it's less than 1% of Americans actually serve in the U.S. military. So it is a small population that do raise their hand and say that, they're willing to serve.
It's amazing. Okay, and so how long have you been serving for?
10 years, a little over 10 years.
Wow. Okay. And that's not the only thing you have going on. You have a family. You have your business. You have, again, we talked about podcasting. You have authoring. You've got so many things going on. And like I mentioned, your website is outstanding. And I want everyone to go there and click the links in the show notes. But can you kind of just walk us through how you designed your website to serve your community? Because it is really, really well done.
Oh, well, thank you. I wasn't the designer of it. Obviously, I had input into it, but the website is in your show notes. It's getinsidethehuddle.com. And for me, as you know, I'm a sports girl, and my brand ties to sports. So everything that I do kind of has that sports feel, sports references. And so the website name also has a sports reference. But for me, it's really about when you're looking at designing your website, no matter what business owner you are, you want to make sure that the way it's designed speaks to your customers, right? And it gets them excited, and you're focusing on the things that are really going to get them interested in wanting to do business with you, wanting to connect with you. It's not just about doing business. You want people to be attracted into your community, and they may not be the customer, but they may tell somebody else that could be a customer. So it's really about attracting those people that really align with your core values, your interests, and building that community and making sure that your website highlights the things that you want to highlight in terms of your business, but also just showcases you too. Because like we know, Dave, people do business with people they know, like, and trust.
That's right. And the one thing I know in podcasting, I know website design, social media, everything is to identify your audience. So you know who you're talking to, so you can address them. But at the same time, you almost have to identify who you're not focused on. So you're not focused on hockey players. Yes. Okay. So that feels weird to not embrace everyone. You want to serve everyone. Why would I exclude anyone? But in that, by trying to bring in everyone into your world, you're not going to do a great job serving a smaller community and focusing on them and what they need. So again, going back to the website and everything you're doing, you really get the sense of your audience. How important is that to you as an author to know your audience?
Well, it's so important for you to know your audience as a podcaster, as an author, as a business owner, because you can't be all things to all people. So you really have to hone in on who are the people you're looking to serve, what is your expertise, and then you tailor your messaging and your content to that audience so that you're attracting those type of people.
And it takes a lot of work to do that. And I think for me, I'll give you an example. I have a podcast for dads. It's called Dad Space. And when I set it up, I was talking to dads. I look at my statistics, and 75% of my audience are female. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, 25% of my audience are men? And I'm like, well, wow. Like I'm focused on my content. I'm focused on my audience. I'm talking to dads. But the fact that I'm bringing in another audience completely is great. And I don't ignore that, or I don't discredit that, but I'm like, I embrace it, but I'm still going to focus on my audience. And whoever comes with me, I'm so thankful and grateful. But I am going to hone in on what I'm trying to do and who I'm trying to serve. So even if you are focused on football, for example, and I get that through your podcasting and your guests and everything you're doing, you're still bringing in sports-minded people or people that are interested, and you can build a community around that. So focus on the audience, and whoever comes along with them, welcome them as well, because that's amazing.
Absolutely. And it's interesting for me, as you know, from my podcast, I have a lot of football players, NFL players on the show. Most of my guests are people that follow sports, even though it's not an X's and O's podcast. We're talking about the business side of sports and things. There are people that know nothing about football that just enjoy the conversations, and they get nuggets out of the show as well on how they can go and implement different things into their own business, into their own life, into their brands. And so it's interesting to see who else has come along for the journey, to your point, just like with your women that listen to the show. That wasn't the originally intended audience, but it's great to have those people along too.
Yeah, because I'm serving them as well. I love that. So for anyone interested in your podcast, we'll put, again, links in the show notes. Is there a podcast episode where they should start? Anywhere they should? Is there a great guest that they should be listening to first? Any direction for people coming to find your podcast for the first time?
That's a great question. I would say it depends on who you are, meaning if you're in the corporate space, I have one that is all about navigating your career and how to move the ball. That's the name of the podcast, How to Move the Ball in Your Career. It was launched in September of 2022. So it's one of the more recent episodes. If you're not in the corporate space and you're not looking at your career, you're a business owner or something, you might want to just check out the last episode. I run my show in season. So we run from the day after Super Bowl until the end of September. So that last episode, which is the first one that'll show up when you look it up, that one has a highlight reel of like 7 or so different clips from different episodes. So you can get a good feel for some of the nuggets that I really liked from conversations this last season. So that might be a good one just to check out to start.
How has podcasting helped you as an author?
That's a great, no one's ever asked me that question. So it's a great question because, I've always enjoyed writing, and I have been planning to write my latest book for quite some time, or I should say I had been wanting to write a book for quite a while. I did not necessarily know all the details of what was going to be in that book. I figured that out last year through a conversation with a friend of mine. And the podcast has helped that because the conversations that I've had with some of my guests have become some of the content that I include into this book.
Yeah, and that's amazing that you can pull from different resources, right? And expand your knowledge. And I love having guests like today. I love having guests on my podcast because I get to be exposed to a world that I don't know and learn from the expert. And that's kind of how I approach every chance I get a chance to speak someone like you with you. And the authors that come through, it's just the power and the passion for what they're writing about just is so inspiring. I tell my guests when I'm done, I feel like I got to go run the block because I'm just so inspired. I've got this energy, I got to go take my dog for a walk. It's really great to meet great people. So let's talk about the books. You have a new book that's on its way like today, which is super exciting. And you have another one that's already been out for a while. Let's start with the first book and give us a sense of that and maybe who the audience was and who kind of your thoughts around writing your first book. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, so the first book was called Move the Ball, again, football references or sports themes. And it was all about how you take American football principles and apply them beyond the field to be successful, not only in business, because everybody talks about sports to business, but how do you apply these principles holistically in everything you do in your life, in your career, et cetera. And my original intended audience for that were males who knew football because I really wanted to showcase in depth what I knew about this sport and how there were so many lessons and strategies I took away from it. It ended up being that quite a lot of women actually watched or read the book because they were intrigued about how are you, Jen, as a woman, talking about myself in third person, how are you, Jen, as a woman, able to pick up on these lessons and then do great things in your career with them. So it was interesting to see that my intended audience didn't end up being, it ended up being a good mix of men and women that bought the book, but I was really trying to connect with males who love football way back when. So that was the first book, Move the Ball. That sparked what's called the Move the Ball movement, which led me to having the podcast. And the movement evolved from being a book about football to this concept of taking the competitive athlete mentality and just focusing on forward motion every single day. You got to keep it moving, a foot, an inch, a yard, whatever. Just move forward no matter what happens that day. You just got to do something to give yourself a little bit of progress. And so that was the first book in the intended audience. And then, just over time, it's kind of grown in its popularity in the movement. And so I did the podcast 2 years ago. Again, same type of a theme, helping people to quote unquote, move the ball forward when it comes to their business, to their career, and just in life.
One thing I remember, I've talked to a couple football players in the past, and it's all the stuff that happens off the field for players too, like watching game tape, for example, on the team you're going to be playing,
Mm-hmm.
seeing their weaknesses and identifying those. And in business and in life, people are watching our game tape. They're watching to see where we're
Yes.
strong and maybe our weaknesses, so they can kind of focus on the weaknesses as a way of winning the game, right? If they can kind of capitalize on
Right.
things we don't do well. How do you kind of see a correlation between game tape in general life when we look at our competition, whether it's in business or wherever we're trying to get in life? How do we kind of focus in on what people are doing well and what they may be struggling with to kind of help us to find that edge?
Yeah, so reviewing the game tape is important for a couple reasons when it comes to off the field in our own lives. One, in Move the Ball, I talk about the importance of understanding the landscape, the competitive landscape, right? So you're reviewing your game film on your competitors to understand how can you differentiate yourself, how can you give yourself an advantage over those competitors. But also that game tape, you need to review your own game tape and spend some time reflecting and being aware of your own right situation. Where are you strong? Where are you not as strong? How do you leverage those things as well to your advantage? How do you minimize the weaknesses or the gaps there? How do you fill them? So reviewing the game tape applies both from understanding your competitors, but also looking at your strengths and your position.
And I heard one other mention too was there's a team had lined up for the next play. The opposition team, they saw a weakness and they called an audible, and I didn't even know what that was until this was explained to me.
Mm-hmm.
And the entire team changed their formation because they saw a weakness
Yes.
in the other team. And so the other team, after watching this team rearrange, they called an audible and switched
Mm-hmm.
again. And I'm like, it's like a chess match going on here. Talk about that a little bit, because I find that fascinating that it's not just a matter of, a simple play that moves the ball forward. There's a lot of strategy going on in football and in life, and you really need to know who your competition is and how you can adapt in a situation where you find a weakness. How do we kind of call that audible?
Absolutely. Like, we all have our plan, right? We know what we're looking to do to execute, or you should have that plan, but that doesn't mean we just stick to that plan. We're always assessing the landscape, looking at how our competition is positioned, looking at what other factors are out there too, from an economic standpoint, macro environment. And sometimes you have to adjust on the fly and call that audible and pivot, because the market conditions, the competitive conditions, those things have changed. So you can't just be so set in your ways to stick to your original plan. Sometimes you have to adapt. Sometimes you have to adapt quickly too. So, I mean, I would even say like COVID, we had our plan, we were moving right. You could say, well, people had to call audibles very quickly in the beginning because nobody knew what was going on. We were tracking hospitalizations every single day. I mean, you saw these metrics everywhere, right? And so businesses were trying to figure out, how do I keep people safe? How do I continue to run my business and not go out of business? And so you had to rapidly adapt to these changing conditions. And so that's what an audible is like. You see something different, either something drastic like COVID, or you just see minor shifts or things that your competitors are doing different, or that your customers might be looking at in terms of new needs or changing needs, and you've got to pivot.
Yeah, I love the visual of football and then adapting it to our lives and to business, and that's a great parallel. And I'm glad you're using that as a way to share your message, because it's very visual, something you can see on the screen and go, I get it. I get what Jen's talking about. I understand. And it really makes sense. So that's amazing. So book number 1 is out, and that's available as well in the show notes. But book number 2, we mentioned, is on its way, maybe even today, arriving, which is super exciting. Can you talk us through book number 2? And it does stand alone. It doesn't have to be read together, but there is some correlation there as well. Can you explain book number 2 for us as well?
Yes, the next book number 2, is called Dominate the Game. Subtitle is How Life Changes When You Show Up. And it's really about how you suit up and how you show up on a daily basis to be able to move the ball. And the reason I use those words, suit up and show up, is on my podcast, I always end every episode saying, until next time, make sure that you suit up, you show up, and you move the ball. So from a business standpoint and a branding standpoint, those are things that my audience is familiar with. And those are things, to any business owner, you want to think about, how do you tie in the things that your customer base or your audience knows to your brand. So that's why I chose to structure the book this way. There's a part one, which is about suiting up. It's not just about your mentality, but it's about physically, how do you prepare? What are the things that you should be doing? So that way you can maximize your efficiency and your productivity each week. There's a show up section as part two, which is all about how you show up every single day and making sure you're executing on the things that you need to. And when you suit up and you show up the right way, then you should hopefully move the ball, right? And move it in the right direction. And so part three of the book is all about moving the ball. Now, there is a tie to the Move the Ball book. But like you said, it doesn't have to be read sequentially. You can read one before the other. You can never read Move the Ball and get so much out of Dominate the Game, but they do tie together.
Amazing. So, okay, let's hone in on the show up part, because I think in life and in business and everything we do, that's the hardest part sometimes, is just showing up and being there. And one of the sayings that I really like is, wherever you are, be all there. And that's just, to me, that means so much. Like, don't just like physically be there, but mentally be there. Be in the game. And talking football analogies as well, for the sake of your team, you can't just kind of phone it in and, I don't really feel like playing today. I'm not really going to exert myself. I'm just going to be here and just be a body on the players bench. Hey, come on, you got to get in the game, and you got to serve your team, right? So they're all working together. Talk a little bit more about how we show up in the world, and maybe some of the ways that people are not showing up, and how we can do better.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, we all know that how you show up matters, right? I mean, that's simple, but how do you do that practically? And I mean, the first part is remaining focused on the things that you need to do that day, right? So there's a saying in football and other sports that says, be where your feet are. So it's about being where your feet are physically, mentally, emotionally, and being fully present on what it is you need to do in that moment for that day. So being locked in is another term that people talk about a lot in sports. I'm all locked in today. That's actually a chapter title in the book, is All Locked In. But that's so important, especially in today's day and age, where there are so many things competing for our time and so many distractions. And there's a quote that says, basically, being able to focus in a world full of notifications is a competitive advantage, because so many people get distracted nowadays. So it's really about staying locked in on the things that you need to do. So that's part of it. I mean, showing up, working on the right things that you need to get done for that day. We can all make a list of 100 plus things that we want to get done every day. But how many of those things do you really need to get done today to make an impact on the things that must get done today versus things that could wait till tomorrow or Friday or next week or whatever, right? So like, it's really about prioritizing those things. The other thing that's important when you show up is, what habits are you implementing on a daily basis? We all know that our habits drive our outcomes. The habits that we have today have gotten us to where we are today. Those same habits might not be the things that we need to do, even though they are effective habits. They might not be effective for where we want to go tomorrow. So there's a chapter in the show up section that's called Ditch Those Old Clothes in the Locker Room. And so those old clothes are those old habits that are no longer serving you. So it's not just about bad habits, it's about the right habits, right? They could be good habits for somebody else because their goals are different than yours. So for your goals today and where you want to go tomorrow, what are the habits that you need to start implementing and continue to execute on if you've got some great ones that are helping you, right? But being mindful of how are you showing up and what clothes are you bringing with you in the locker room?
So, okay, here we go. So give me one good habit that you think we should implement today and one bad habit we should drop as soon as possible.
Great question. So I would say generally, let's start with the bad one, because this is easy. The first thing that I would say people should not do is, when you wake up in the morning, do not go on your phone immediately and check into the world. The reason for this is, what happens is then you are now in reactive mode and you are responding to everything that you see on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever, and you are checking into someone else's time, right? Or it's someone else's world. You're not now being deliberate and intentional with your time. You're spending it on other things that aren't helping you to get done what you needed to get done today. So there's a research has shown, if you check your phone or social media within the first hour of the day, you're 30% less productive that day. And the reason for that is because, again, you're now responding and consuming your time with all these other things that, had you not done that, then you wouldn't be wasting minutes, right? There's a chapter in the book called Manage the Game Clock. There's 1,440 minutes we have each day. So how are you spending those minutes when you've checked in to social media in the world? Now you're consuming some of those minutes on that stuff that may or may not be productive. Usually it's not. So that's the first thing. Instead of checking into the internet and the world first thing, the other habit that I would say implement is I have what I call my morning power hour. So the first hour of the day, I'm taking time to review my plan, look at what meetings I have on the calendar, making sure those are still valid for the day, or should I push something out because it's not a priority for the day. I make sure that I have scheduled block times for the tasks that are important. I've scheduled those usually at the beginning of the week because that way I'm trying to be very organized with how I spend my time. So I'm just making sure those are still valid. I'm also spending some time just to think strategically on my business. Like, am I focused on the right things that are going to help me? Do I need to add some things or reshift some things? But I'm taking that time for me and my business. And then I'm also stretching. Hydrating is very important too, but I'm warming the body up and, getting ready to have an impactful day. So I would say no matter what your goals are, those two things are things that are applicable. One thing you should not do and one thing that you should do every day.
Okay, so there's people listening to us, Jen, and they're like, okay, well, it sounds like Jen's got it all put together. She's an expert. She's written 2 books. So she probably has no struggles in life. She's probably superhuman. Well, you are pretty well superhuman with the amount of stuff you got going on. But can we be real and transparent with people right now? Is there anything that you're struggling with, a bad habit, that you're trying to focus on and do better at? For me personally, I'll say, is spending more time for myself and making room for myself in my day, because I can fill up my day with everyone else, and I'm the last to be served. So that's my bad habit that I'm working on. Is there anything that you're working on to be transparent with our audience and say, listen, I don't have it all together, and I'm working on this area of my life, and I'm trying to make this better? What is that for you?
Yeah, great question. I think it's important to highlight those things too, because we see people, then we see their success and we think that, oh my gosh, they've got it together, when everybody's human. We all have things that we struggle with or that we're working on. So I appreciate the question. For me, as an entrepreneur and someone that has a lot of things that I'm juggling, it's very hard to make as much time for the family as I want. As a single parent, you're the one, right? You're the breadwinner. So there's a lot of pressure around, having to work all the time. But in the evenings, I'm really trying to reduce how much time I spend working. Now, I understand that because I'm doing that, there are things that are not going to get done for my business, and I may not get another paycheck because of that right away. And so there's a delay to that, right? Or you might not close a particular deal because you're not working on it in the evening. But I'm really trying to set a boundary on, okay, you know what? I understand that. I could grind and hustle, and there's always going to be more things to do. However, at what cost, right? And so your kids, as you know, your kids are not going to be your kids forever. So I try to, that doesn't mean I don't work at night. I do. And usually when my kids are sleeping, I go back at it for a little bit, but I'm carving out that time to make sure that we are doing activities as well. So it's not just about the hustle and the grind.
I love it. I love it, Jen. Thank you for being transparent too, because again, I listen to so many podcasts and it just seems like everybody's got it all figured out. And I'm struggling over here going, how can I make my life better? But it just seems like everybody else is so perfect. And I just think we need to kind of disassemble that a little bit so people realize still 2 real people doing life, figuring it out, making mistakes, and doing our best and trying to move that ball forward, right? That's what we're trying to do every day. So, yeah, like not every football player is perfect on day one after coming out of, practice. You are going to make mistakes. You're going to fumble. You're going to do things wrong. But you just got to keep trying. You got to show up, right? That's it.
Right. Can I share one story? Because I think it's important to showcase real life too. So the other day I had gone to Panera and I had gotten a drink. I put it in my drink holder in my car. Well, I had my AirPod case underneath it and it was at nighttime, so I didn't see it. I got to a red light. I ended up braking for the red light. That's good. Don't run them. And the drink went forward and spilled all over my center console. I've got ice. I've got sticky lemonade. And I'm like, oh, right. And so it had been a long day. So I was tired. I was like, oh, I don't need this. And then I went home and I ended up putting the lemonade in the fridge. Well, I was so tired that instead of clearing the shelf to put it on, I hit the shelf with the cup. So the cup splits into the rest of the drink, spills all over. And I'm just like, you've got to be kidding me. Why I want to share that is because things happen. And I'm sure those listening can think of some similar type of event, maybe not exactly the same circumstances where you're just like, what is going on, right? This is ridiculous. When those things happen, it's important to pause, breathe, and realize it's okay, right? Things happen, and be upset for a minute. It's fine. But remember that you can still control what you do after that, right? So I cleaned up my mess in the car. I cleaned up the mess at home, and then I figured out, okay, in the remaining part of this evening, I'm still going to end this day on a great note. So what can I do so that by the time I go to bed, I can still be like, you know what? All those things happen, but I still made this a good day because of X, Y, and Z.
I love it. I love it, Jen. So I love talking to you. It's so amazing. Okay, you're a podcaster and you're such a great thought leader and everything. I want you to end off the podcast because, again, you're a podcaster. You know how to do this, which is great for me. I can just sit in the passenger seat and hold your lemonade for you. Can you close off and share with people how working with you and how your books are going to help them, and kind of wrap this up for us and speak to the listeners? You know, with me, that any listener that's with us to this point, they're in. They love what you're talking about, what you're sharing about. Can you, instead of me closing it, I would rather you do this because, you know, I'm here to learn. So how would you like to close this off, and how do we support our listener to kind of get them to move forward and move that ball forward a little bit more?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for letting me do that. I'm honored to close it. Pressure's on now. But I would say, first, thanks to everyone for listening. And if there's a takeaway that you got from our show, it's really about thinking strategically on how am I going to move that ball forward every single day. Remember, it's not about the big swings or the big plays. It's just about little progress every single day. If you get some big swings, great, but it doesn't always have to be that. So just remember that if you could just focus on a few little things to get done every single day, that's going to add up and compound. And remember, the choices are always yours. They say that there's two types of people in this world. One, those that believe that they can do anything, and the other are those that believe they can't, and both are right. So which kind of person are you going to be? Are you going to be the one that believes you can do anything that you set your mind to? Sounds cliche, but are you going to be the one that believes that you can really achieve whatever goal it is that you want? And if so, what actions are you going to take today and each and every day going forward to be able to move the ball and dominate your game? See how I threw all that together? That's good branding. That's what I do with people in my business. Is it's really about how do you take and position your brand so that you can attract the opportunities that you want, so that you can have the clients that you want, so that you can be successful in the ways that you want. So really, I just want people to be thinking about how are you going to move the ball each and every day.
Jen Garrett's with me today, everybody. Thank you, Jen, for being here. Again, the books, all the stuff we've mentioned, all the great, amazing quotes. Be where your feet are. Suit up, show up, move the ball. Like so many great things, Jen, to kind of soak in and let them soak into our minds and put into practice. Thank you for being such a practical and amazing guest. And congratulations on book number 2. We'll be watching with great anticipation as these arrive and sharing the moment with you. And to Dominic as well for helping to make all this happen and get these books out into the world. That's I love having a great friend in common. That means a lot to me as well. So, Jen, thank you so much for being part of this and watching with great anticipation and expectation for what's to come for you. Got a big fan in Canada, so thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciated being on today.
All right. Very good, everyone. Go please check out the show notes and connect with Jen and let her know you heard her on Living the Next Chapter. Thanks, Jen. The podcast is over. Thank you for being a part of this episode. If this is your very first episode, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. You can go back in our catalog. You can see some of the past episodes. But if you want to get a sneak peek of what's coming, you want to jump the line? I got something for you. Go to our YouTube channel. Again, links are in the show notes and on our website, livingthenextchapter.com, and you can go to our YouTube channel and get the most recent episode way before everybody else. So we're putting this at the end of the podcast because we don't want to tell everyone. We don't want to have a stampede, but we're having some great conversations over on our YouTube channel. You're invited. You're this far. You're the one listening. You are invited to our YouTube channel. Go over there and you can see the most up-to-date episodes in real time. Meet you over there. Thanks for listening. Cheers.
Mindshift Power Podcast, the podcast for teenagers and those who work with them. There's a huge problem in America today. There's a very large disconnect between teenagers and the adults who work with them. I'm looking to bridge that gap with real, raw, honest conversation, not held back by the chains of political correctness. You cannot solve a problem you do not understand. Want to understand teenagers today? Listen to this podcast. This podcast is for teens in the U.S. and Canada. To learn more, go to fatimabay.com/podcast or just look for Mindshift Power Podcast on any listening platform. I look forward to you being a faithful listener.